They say grief does strange things to people. I've always thought that was a rather gentle way of putting it. Grief doesn't just do strange things. It peels back the skin of civility and shows you the skeleton of a relationship you thought you knew. It holds up a mirror, but it's a cruel one, the kind you find in a funhouse that distorts everything into a grotesque parody of the truth. For me, that truth was revealed in the cold, damp air of a forest I didn't recognize, just 3 days after I buried my husband of 47 years. The man holding the mirror, the one showing me the monstrous reflection of my life, was my own son. Before we get to that horrible, clarifying moment in the woods, if you find strength in stories about finding your own power after being underestimated, please consider subscribing to my channel and liking this video. Your support means the world to me. My husband, David, was a good man. Or at least, I had spent the better part of my life convincing myself he was. He was charming, loud, the center of every room, a man who built a successful construction business with what everyone called his bare hands and sheer force of will. Our life was comfortable, and from the outside it was perfect. We had the large family home, the 2 cars, the annual vacations. We had our son, Mark, our pride and joy. I was the quiet one, the bedrock on which David built his world. I was the steadfast wife, the devoted mother, the silent partner in every sense of the word. I managed the house, the finances, the social calendar, and most importantly, I managed David's moods and Mark's needs. My life was a tapestry woven from the threads of their comfort and happiness. When David's heart finally gave out, a sudden, shocking event that left no time for goodbyes, my world didn't so much crumble as it fell silent. The booming voice was gone. The heavy footsteps on the stairs were gone. The sheer, overwhelming presence of him was replaced by a hollow echo. At the funeral, I was a ghost. People floated past me, murmuring condolences, their eyes filled with a pity that felt alien. They saw the grieving widow, the fragile, elderly woman left all alone. They saw what they expected to see. So did my son. Mark, and his perfectly put-together wife, Amelia, flanked me the entire time, their hands on my elbows, guiding me as if I were a porcelain doll. They spoke for me. Mom's holding up as well as can be expected, Mark would say, his voice thick with a performance of sorrow. She's just in shock. We're taking care of everything, Amelia would add, patting my hand while her eyes scanned the room, assessing the attendees. They were so convincing, so solicitous. I let them do it. In the fog of my grief, their control felt like a life raft. I didn't have the strength to correct them, to say, I can speak for myself. I am not shattering. I am just quiet. The day after the funeral was a blow of paperwork. The day after that, the 3rd day, was the day it all happened. The house was quiet. Amelia had taken their 2 children, my grandchildren, back to their own pristine home in the suburbs. It was just Mark and me. He made us coffee, his movements stiff and awkward in the kitchen that had always been my domain. He didn't ask where anything was. After 40 years in this house, he still moved through it like a guest. Mom, he said, his back to me. Let's go for a drive. Get some fresh air. It'll do you good, I should have known. The careful, measured tone. The refusal to meet my eye. But I was tired. My bones ached with a weariness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with loss. So I just nodded. I pulled on the cardigan, that still smelled faintly of David's cologne, and followed my son out to his ridiculously oversized luxury SUV. We drove for a long time, much longer than a simple trip for fresh air would warrant. We left our familiar town, then the suburbs, and soon we were on country roads I'd never seen before. The tidy lawns gave way to overgrown fields, then dense clusters of trees. I watched the world go by, a passive observer in my own life. A knot of unease began to twist in my stomach, cold and heavy. Where are we going, Mark? I finally asked, my voice a dry whisper. He didn't answer right away. He just kept his eyes fixed on the winding road, his knuckles white on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. Almost there, he said, his voice clipped. He turned onto a dirt track, the branches of skeletal trees scraping against the windows of his expensive car. He pulled to a stop in a small, muddy clearing. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. He finally turned to look at me, and in his eyes, I saw no grief. No love. I saw only a chilling, resolute practicality. This wasn't my son. This was a businessman closing a deal he found distasteful. The air in the car grew thick and cold, each passing second stretching into an eternity. He took a deep breath, the kind a person takes before delivering a piece of bad news they've rehearsed 100 times. Mom, he began, and the word itself sounded foreign, a label for a role I no longer played in his life. We need to talk about the future. Your future, I said nothing. I just watched him, my hands folded in my lap, the way a student sits when they know they are about to be disciplined. I was watching a stranger wear my son's face. Amelia and I have been talking, he continued, and we're really worried about you. This house. It's too much for you to handle on your own. The upkeep, the memories. It's not healthy for you to be rattling around in there all by yourself. Every word was a carefully polished stone, smooth and cold and designed to build a wall between us. The memories. As if the memories were a disease he needed to cure me of. As if this house wasn't the only tangible piece of my life I had left. He was talking about my home, the place where I had brought him home from the hospital, where I'd marked his height on the doorframe, where I'd nursed him through fevers and celebrated his triumphs. And he was talking about it like it was a liability. He paused, waiting for me to agree, to nod, to cry, to do something that would make this easier for him. I remained silent. My silence seemed to unnerve him. It wasn't in the script he'd prepared. Look, he said, his voice gaining a harder edge. The thing is, Amelia is pregnant again. We need more space. A bigger yard for the kids. Our place is bursting at the seams. We were thinking. We could sell both houses, yours and ours, and get a big place. Something for all of us. The picture he painted was meant to sound idyllic, a multi-generational haven. But I knew what it really was. It was a hostile takeover. They didn't want me. They wanted my house. They wanted the value locked within its bricks and mortar. They wanted to liquidate my life and use the proceeds to upgrade their own. Then came the final, brutal blow. He wouldn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, through the windshield, at the grey, unforgiving woods. And? We found a wonderful place for you, Mom. It's more of a community. For people your age. You'll have professional care, activities. You won't have to worry about a thing. He still wouldn't look at me. Because if he looked at me, he would have to see his mother. He would have to see the woman who gave up a scholarship to a prestigious university to marry his father, the woman who worked 2 jobs in the early years so David could get his business off the ground. He would have to see the woman who poured every spare dollar, every spare ounce of energy, into him. Into his education, his hobbies, his first car. The down payment on the very house he now claimed was too small. As he spoke, my mind unspooled a lifetime of sacrifice. I saw myself at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, long after David and a young Mark were asleep, poring over the company's books. David was the face, the handshake, the salesman. But I was the numbers. I was the one who balanced the budgets, who found the efficiencies, who managed the investments that turned a small, struggling company into a local powerhouse. David brought home the money, but I was the one who made it grow. He never acknowledged it publicly. It was our secret. She's great with the books, he'd say dismissively if anyone asked. He liked the image of the self-made man. And I, in the name of love and peace in the family, I let him have it. I let the world think I was just the quiet, supportive wife. I let my son believe it, too. And this was my reward. To be deemed an inconvenience. A problem to be managed. A set of assets to be liquidated. He finally ran out of words. The silence descended again, heavier this time. He had laid out his terms. He had passed his sentence. He finally turned to me, a flicker of something. Was it guilt? No, it was impatience. He wanted this to be over. So, he said, his voice softening into a grotesque parody of kindness. This is it, Mom. This is goodbye. To the old way of doing things. It's time for a new chapter. For all of us, he reached over and patted my knee, a gesture so condescending, so dismissive, it was like a spark on dry tinder. And in that moment, the grief, the shock, the years of quiet compliance. They didn't just vanish. They underwent a kind of alchemy. They hardened into something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was a cold, clear, and utterly calm fury. My son, my only child, had just told me he was disposing of me. He'd driven me to a desolate patch of woods to inform me that my life, as I knew it, was over, that I was now a line item in his budget, a problem to be solved with a brochure from a community for people my age. He said it was a new chapter, but what he meant was that he was closing my book and using the covers to bind his own. For 47 years, I had been the silent architect of our family's comfort. While David was out front, shaking hands and taking the credit, I was in the back room, turning his modest income into real wealth. It started small. I had inherited a small sum from my own mother, a fiercely practical woman who had always told me, Helen, always have your own money. Not for leaving, but for staying on your own terms. I never thought I'd need it for either. I thought I was building a fortress for my family. I took that inheritance and I studied. While Mark was at school and David was on job sites, I read books on investing, on real estate, on market trends. I started with a few safe stocks, then a small rental property in a neighboring town. I managed it myself, painting walls and vetting tenants on the weekends. David thought it was a cute hobby. He had no idea. Over the decades, that hobby grew into a substantial portfolio. I acquired properties, diversified into bonds, and made shrewd investments in tech startups long before they were household names. I did it all quietly, meticulously, under a holding company registered in my maiden name. It was my secret garden, a place of competence and control in a life that was otherwise dedicated to serving others. David knew about it, of course, but he didn't understand the scale. To him, it was Helen's nest egg, something that gave him peace of mind, but which he never, ever examined too closely. It was my domain, and he was happy to be ignorant as long as his own company accounts looked healthy and his image, as the sole provider, remained intact. Our son, Mark, knew nothing. To him, I was just Mom. The woman who baked cookies, drove carpool, and magically made sure the bills were always paid. He grew up in the comfortable house that my investments paid off 20 years early. He went to the private university that my stock portfolio funded. He married Amelia in a lavish wedding that was a gift from my nest egg. He and Amelia bought their starter home, with a down payment that came directly from the sale of one of my rental properties. Each time, it was presented as a gift from both of us, from your loving parents, but the money was always mine. David was a builder. He built houses. I was a builder, too. I built wealth. And the entire time, my son and his wife saw only the fruits of my labor, never the labor itself. They saw the shade from the tree, but they never once thought to look at the roots. They just assumed the tree belonged to them. I remembered a conversation a few years ago. Mark and Amelia were over for Sunday dinner. Mark was complaining about his boss, about taxes, about the cost of living. It's not like for your generation, he'd said, gesturing around my kitchen. You and Dad had it easy. You bought this house for pennies. Everything was cheaper. You don't know how hard it is for us. I had just looked at him, a piece of roast chicken halfway to my mouth. The sheer, breathtaking ignorance of it. He was sitting in a chair I'd reupholstered myself, at a table I'd refinished, in a kitchen I'd redesigned and renovated using dividends from an investment I'd made before he was born. And he was telling me I'd had it easy. Amelia had chimed in, of course. It's true, Helen, she'd said, in that soft, patronizing tone of hers. Mark works so hard. We just want to give our kids the kind of stability you and David had, the stability I had single-handedly engineered. The stability they were currently consuming like a swarm of locusts. After David's death, their concern was a masterclass in manipulation. Mom, you shouldn't be worrying about bills, Mark had said, taking a stack of mail off my desk. Let me handle this. What he was doing, I now realized, was not helping. He was gathering intelligence. He was trying to get a picture of the estate, of what was now, in his mind, his. They saw David's death not as a tragedy, but as a transaction. The patriarch was gone, it was time to divvy up the spoils. And the matriarch? She was just part of the estate. A sentimental, breathing antique that needed to be moved into storage. My son's voice, slicing through the thick silence of the car, pulled me from my reverie. So, what do you say, Mom? He asked, a hint of impatience coloring his tone. He expected a response now. He expected tears, protests, a weak, elderly woman's grief-stricken bargaining. He expected me to play the part he had assigned me. I turned my head slowly and looked at him. I really looked at him. I didn't see the baby I had rocked to sleep, or the little boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged. I didn't see the teenager I had taught to drive, or the young man whose graduation I had wept through. I saw a middle-aged man with a weak chin and greedy eyes. I saw a stranger who had benefited from a lifetime of my silent labor, and was now declaring me redundant. And I felt nothing. The love, the fierce, all-consuming motherly devotion that had defined my existence, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, clear-eyed calm. The grief for my husband was still there, a dull ache in my chest. But this new feeling, this cold certainty, was a shield around it. All right, Mark, I said. My voice was even, steady. It didn't even sound like my own. It sounded like the voice of the woman who negotiated with bankers and real estate agents, the woman who read quarterly reports and made decisions worth millions of dollars. He blinked, clearly taken aback. This was not the reaction he'd anticipated. All right, he repeated, a frown creasing his forehead. Just? All right. Yes, I said. If this is what you and Amelia feel is best, then I won't stand in your way. You've found a place for me. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He was a fish on a hook, and he didn't even know it. Ah, yes. Yes, we did. It's called the Pines. It's supposed to be very nice. We pre-registered you. Paid the deposit, of course they had. They were so efficient when it came to their own interests. The deposit, I was certain, had come from the joint account I kept with him, the one I topped up every month for emergencies, his emergencies, never mine. Then you should take me there, I said. There's no point in dragging this out, his confusion was palpable. He had come prepared for a battle, for emotional warfare. My swift, calm surrender disarmed him completely. He thought he was winning. He thought I was a broken, compliant old woman. He had no idea that my compliance was not a weakness, it was a weapon. The drive to the Pines was surreal. Mark tried to make small talk, pointing out landmarks with a false cheerfulness that was nauseating. He was relieved. He had done the hard part, and it had been surprisingly easy. He was already mentally furnishing my house, picturing his children playing in my garden. The Pines was exactly what I expected. A low, grey building with the architectural charm of a showbox. It smelled of bleach and despair. A harried-looking woman at the front desk checked my name off a list. Mark handed her a small overnight bag he'd packed for me. It probably contained a nightgown, a toothbrush, and a few other sundries he deemed sufficient for the woman who gave him life. He turned to me, his duty done. "Well, Mom. They'll show you to your room. I'll call you tomorrow. Let you get settled in." He leaned in for a hug, but it was a clumsy, awkward gesture. I didn't hug him back. I just stood there. He pulled away quickly. "It's for the best, Mom. You'll see," and then he was gone. He walked out the door without a backward glance, climbing back into his fortress of an SUV and driving away, leaving his mother in a state-run facility under the fluorescent lights of a sad, empty lobby. I stood there for a long moment, watching his car disappear. I felt a strange sense of lightness. The weight of his expectations, of his perceived needs, had been lifted. He had severed the cord. He just didn't realize he was the one who would bleed out. I turned to the receptionist. "May I use your telephone, please?" I asked, my voice polite and firm. She pointed to a payphone on the wall. I walked over to it, my step steady. I didn't call a friend to cry. I didn't call a relative to complain. I pulled a small, worn business card from a hidden pocket in my wallet. The card read simply, "Gable and Associates. Legal counsel." I dialed the number. A calm voice answered on the second ring. "Mr. Gable's office, this is Helen Maxwell," I said. "Please put me through to Arthur. It's time." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, then the familiar, reassuring voice of Arthur Gable came through. He had been my lawyer for 30 years, but he was more than that. He was my confidant, the only other person in the world who knew the full extent of my hobby. Arthur was a quiet, meticulous man, the polar opposite of my gregarious husband. He had helped me set up the holding company, structure the trusts, and review every contract for every property I'd ever purchased. He knew the real story. "Helen," he said, his voice calm and serious. "I was sorry to hear about David. I was expecting your call, though I confess I had hoped it would be under better circumstances. Are you all right?" His question was genuine. He wasn't asking about my health in the abstract, condescending way my son had. He was asking if I was safe, if I was in control. "I'm fine, Arthur," I replied, my voice steady despite the sterile, hopeless atmosphere of the Pines lobby. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I'm clear. My son, Mark, has just dropped me off at a residential care facility. He and his wife have decided I'm a burden, and intend to sell my home to fund their lifestyle upgrade." I delivered the information, without a trace of emotion, like a field commander reporting enemy movements. Arthur was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was laced with a cold anger that warmed me more than any expression of sympathy could. "I see," he said. "And I trust you agreed to this arrangement." "I was a model of compliance," I said. "He believes I'm a confused, grieving old woman who has meekly accepted her fate. He has no idea who he's dealing with," Arthur said, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "He's about to find out. Helen, this is the contingency we planned for 20 years ago. The break glass in case of emergency protocol. Are you ready to execute?" The contingency. It sounded so dramatic, but it was just a series of legal and financial maneuvers we had put in place after a particularly galling incident where David had, without consulting me, promised a substantial loan to one of his feckless relatives, assuming my nest egg would cover it. That was the day I realized my financial independence wasn't just for my own security, It was a fortress to protect what I had built from the careless generosity of my husband and the grasping entitlement of my future heirs. The plan was simple. In the event of David's death, if my son tried to seize control of assets that were not his, I would systematically and legally dismantle his assumptions, reasserting my sole ownership over everything. We had hoped it would never be necessary. Hope, I was learning, was a beautiful but useless emotion. Yes, Arthur, I said. I'm ready. Let's start with the house. From my hidden pocket, I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It contained a list. I had written it the night after the funeral, sitting at my kitchen table while my son and his wife slept peacefully in my guest room, no doubt dreaming of inheritance. I had known, with a mother's intuition, what was coming. The property at 128, Oak Street, I began, my voice crisp. It is held in the H.M. Properties Trust, correct? My maiden name, Helen Miller, that is correct, Arthur confirmed. The deed is solely in the name of the trust. David was never on the title. His will has no claim on it whatsoever. Excellent. I want you to contact Susan at Crestview Realty. She's the best in the area. Tell her I want the house on the market by noon tomorrow. Price it to sell. I want it gone. There was the sound of furious typing on Arthur's end. Consider it done, he said. What's next on your list? The joint account. The one at National Federated Bank, ending in 4521. Mark is a signatory on it. I want you to call the bank manager, Mr. Peterson. He knows you. Use the code word solitaire. I want my son's name removed from that account effective immediately. Then, transfer the entire balance, minus $1, into my primary investment account, which Mark has no knowledge of. Solitaire, Arthur repeated. Removing Mark, transferring funds. Understood. The dollar I was leaving behind was a petty gesture, I admit. But it felt important. I wanted him to see the single, solitary dollar, and understand the totality of his miscalculation. Next, I continued, feeling a surge of power, a sense of control I hadn't felt in days. The utility bills for the house, the property taxes, the insurance. They are all on automatic payment from that joint account. I want all of those automatic payments cancelled, effective today. Let the bills be rerouted to the house. Let Mark deal with them when they arrive. Arthur chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. He's going to have a very unpleasant few days, he said. He's going to have a very unpleasant life, I corrected him. Finally, for today at least. My will. I want to schedule an appointment to draft a new one. The previous version left a significant portion of my personal assets to Mark and his children. I want to change that. The new beneficiary of my entire estate will be the Helen Miller Foundation for Underprivileged Women. We can work out the details later. Helen, that's magnificent, Arthur said. When would you like to come in? As soon as possible, I said. There's just one problem. I'm currently a resident of the Pines. My son believes I'm here to stay. Give me 1 hour, Arthur said, his voice ringing with determination. I'll be there myself to pick you up. I will explain to the administration that I am your legal counsel, and that you have been placed here under duress, and without a proper competency hearing, which, I can assure them, would be a very expensive mistake for them to be party to. Pack your bag, Helen. You won't be staying the night. I hung up the phone. I looked around the lobby. The sad, beige walls, the wilting plant in the corner, the faint scent of boiled cabbage. This was the future my son had chosen for me. A waiting room for death. He thought he had the power to put me here. He was about to learn that I had the power to burn his world to the ground. And I was just getting started. Arthur Gable was as good as his word. Precisely 58 minutes after my call, a sleek black car pulled up to the entrance of the Pines. Arthur, looking every bit the formidable lawyer in his dark grey suit, strode into the lobby. The harried receptionist looked up, startled. "I am Arthur Gable," he announced, his voice echoing in the quiet space. "I am legal counsel for Helen Maxwell. I am here to take my client home. She has been brought here under false pretenses, and I suggest you cooperate fully unless you wish for your establishment to become the subject of a major lawsuit regarding elder abuse and illegal confinement." The receptionist turned pale. She stammered something about needing to call her supervisor. "You do that," Arthur said, not unkindly. "I'll wait." He walked over to me and gave me a small, supportive smile. "Are you ready, Helen?" "I've been ready for 30 years, Arthur," I said. It took less than 15 minutes. A flustered manager appeared. Arthur spoke to him in a low, firm voice, using words like power of attorney, fiduciary duty, and full financial audit. The manager, a man who clearly wanted no part of this, practically tripped over himself to show us the door, assuring us that Mrs. Maxwell was free to leave at any time and that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. As I walked out of the Pines, I took one last look at the place. It was my son's monument to my irrelevance. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction knowing that soon, his own life would be stripped down to its barest essentials. Arthur drove me not to my house, but to a suite at the Grand Hotel downtown, a place of quiet, old-world elegance. "You'll be more comfortable here," he explained. "And harder to find. Your home is now a property for sale. It is no longer your sanctuary." He was right. The house was tainted. It was no longer a home, it was a battleground. From the hotel suite, with a cup of tea in my hands and the city lights twinkling below, we began Phase 2. Arthur opened his briefcase, and it was like a general unrolling his battle maps. "Susan from Crestview Realty has been contacted," he reported. She was surprised, to say the least, but she understands the need for discretion and speed. She has a professional photographer scheduled for tomorrow morning, and will be listing the property by noon. She believes she can have a firm offer within the week, given the market. "Good," I said. "What about the bank?" Mr. Peterson was most helpful once I mentioned Solitaire. "Mark's access to the account has been revoked. The funds, totaling $247,000, have been transferred. The remaining balance is exactly $1. Arthur permitted himself a thin smile. "The cancellation of the automatic payments is also complete. The next round of bills for the mortgage, the utilities, the property insurance. They will all arrive in the mail, addressed to the current resident of 128 Oak Street." I pictured Mark's face when he saw those envelopes. He, who had never paid a household bill in his life, who believed money simply appeared when needed. "Now," Arthur said, pulling out a thick file. "Let's talk about the more significant assets. The ones Mark and Amelia believe constitute Dad's estate." This was the heart of the matter. David's will, which Arthur had also drawn up years ago, was a simple document. It left the family business, Maxwell Construction, and all personal effects to his beloved son, Mark. Mark believed the business was the source of our wealth. He had no idea it was a carefully managed entity, intentionally run with low profits and high expenses, a vehicle for paying salaries and maintaining a certain lifestyle, but not for generating significant wealth. All the real profits had been systematically diverted, for decades, into H.M. Properties, my holding company. The properties, the stocks, the bonds, that was the real estate. And it was all mine. "Mark's inheritance," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth, "is a small construction company with aging equipment, 2 full-time employees, and a business loan that's due for renewal in 6 months. His personal effects include his father's collection of golf clubs and a dozen expensive suits." Arthur nodded grimly. "And the house, which he assumes is part of the estate, is mine," I finished. "The cars? The SUV he drives is leased through the business. The lease is also up in 6 months. Your sedan is owned outright by you, personally, and the investment portfolio. The one he heard David mention once or twice. It's a phantom," Arthur said. Any stocks David owned personally were sold years ago to fund Mark's wedding, as I recall. The real portfolio is yours, and the account details are known only to you and me. We sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the beautiful, brutal simplicity of it all. I had built a financial fortress, and my son had just tried to lock me out of it, not realizing I held all the keys. My phone, a simple flip phone I used for emergencies, buzzed on the table. It was a text from Mark. I read it aloud to Arthur. "Mom, where are you? The people at the Pines said you left with a lawyer. What's going on?" This isn't funny. I felt nothing. No guilt, no anger. Just a profound, liberating detachment. I placed the phone back on the table, face down. "He thinks this is a game," I said to Arthur. "Let's begin the next move," he replied, handing me a pen. "Let's draft your new will." We spent the next 2 hours outlining the Helen Miller Foundation. It would provide grants and scholarships to women over 50 who were returning to the workforce or starting their own businesses. Women who had been underestimated. Women who, like me, had a quiet strength that the world had overlooked. With every clause we drafted, I felt another layer of the old me, the accommodating wife, the doting mother, the silent partner, sloughing away. I was no longer just Helen Maxwell, grieving widow. I was Helen Miller, philanthropist, architect of my own life, and the administrator of my son's long-overdue education. The first domino fell the next afternoon. I was in my hotel suite, reading a novel I'd meant to get to for years, when my phone started buzzing incessantly. It was Mark. He called once, twice, a third time. I let each call go to voicemail. Then came the texts, a frantic cascade of digital panic. The first one read, "Mom, call me now. The bank card was just declined at the grocery store. Amelia is stranded." This is ridiculous, I imagined Amelia, standing at the checkout with a cart full of organic kale and artisanal cheese, her perfect face contorting in indignation. A small, uncharitable smile touched my lips. I continued reading my book. The next text came an hour later. "Okay, I called the bank. They said my name was removed from the account. They said you authorized it. Mom, what the hell is going on? Did that lawyer put you up to this? You're not in your right mind." The classic move. When a woman asserts her power, she must be crazy. It was so predictable it was almost boring. I sipped my tea. Then came the call he must have received from the real estate agent. The text that followed was in all capital letters. "Susan from Crestview Realty just called me. She said you're selling the house. Our house. What are you doing? Are you trying to make us homeless? Call me. Our house." The possessive pronoun was so telling. He had already moved in his mind. He had already erased me from my own home. His panic was a symphony to my ears. I pictured him pacing in his too small house, running his hands through his hair, his world tilting on its axis. He was discovering, for the first time in his privileged life, that actions have consequences. Amelia soon joined the chorus. A text from her number, saccharine and manipulative. "Helen, this is Amelia. Mark is so upset. We are all so worried about you. This isn't like you. Please, just come home. We can talk this through. We love you, love." They used that word like a weapon, a tool to pry open doors that should have remained shut. Their love was conditional. It was contingent on my compliance, on my willingness to be a silent, open wallet. The moment I ceased to be useful, their love evaporated, replaced by a cold, practical plan for my disposal. Their panicked messages were proof of that. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about their access. They were worried about the money. They had built their entire life on the assumption of my perpetual support, and I had just kicked out the foundation. I forwarded all the texts to Arthur with a simple note. "The fish are biting," he replied almost instantly. "Let them thrash about for a while. They'll tire themselves out." I followed his advice. For 2 days, I lived in a cocoon of silence and peace. I ordered room service, took long baths, and slept without the heavy weight of another person's needs pressing down on me. I didn't exist to make someone coffee, to iron a shirt, to listen to a litany of workplace complaints. I existed only for myself. It was a novel and exhilarating feeling. The house, Susan the realtor informed me, was a sensation. An immaculately maintained, spacious family home in a desirable neighborhood, priced to move. She had 3 cash offers within 48 hours, all well above the asking price. I accepted the highest one, a no-contingency offer from a young doctor and her family. The closing was scheduled for 2 weeks' time. Mark and Amelia must have seen the "for sale" sign go up, followed quickly by the "sold" sticker. Their desperation escalated. The texts turned from pleading to accusatory. "You're destroying this family," Mark wrote. "Dad would be ashamed of you. What about the grandchildren?" Amelia chimed in. "You're stealing their inheritance. How could you be so selfish?" Selfish. It was the ultimate accusation, the one they saved for when all else failed. My entire life had been an exercise in selflessness. I had sacrificed my ambitions, my time, my energy, my financial security on the altar of my family. And now, the one time I chose to act in my own interest, to protect myself from their greed, I was selfish. The irony was so bitter it could curdle milk. They had no idea what selfishness truly was. Selfishness was driving your grieving mother to the woods and abandoning her. Selfishness was plotting to sell her home out from under her to finance your own desires. Selfishness was seeing your parent not as a person, but as a portfolio to be liquidated. On the 3rd day of my silence, they found me. I don't know how. Perhaps they hired a private investigator. Perhaps they simply called every expensive hotel in the city. It didn't matter. The phone in my suite rang, and the polite voice of the front desk manager informed me that a Mr. and Mrs. Mark Maxwell were in the lobby, demanding to see me. "Shall I send them away, Mrs. Maxwell?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. I could have said yes. I could have hidden forever. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't about running away. It was about standing my ground. This needed a final confrontation. A closing argument. "No," I said, my voice calm. "Tell them I will meet them in the lobby in 10 minutes. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at my reflection. I saw a woman in her late 60s, her face etched with the lines of a life fully lived. But my eyes were different. They were clear, resolute, and cold as a winter sky. The fragile, grieving widow was gone. The woman looking back at me was Helen Miller. And she was ready for a fight. I took the elevator down to the lobby. It was a grand, cavernous space with marble floors and plush velvet armchairs. I saw them immediately, standing near the concierge desk, looking completely out of place in their casual suburban attire. Mark was fidgeting, his face a mask of anger and anxiety. Amelia stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of indignation and what she probably thought was righteous concern. They looked like castaways washed up on the shore of a world they didn't understand. I walked towards them, my footsteps echoing softly on the marble. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a simple but elegant pair of grey trousers and a cashmere sweater. I looked composed, wealthy, and utterly in control. They spotted me, and Mark rushed forward, his voice a harsh whisper. "Mom? What is all this? A hotel? Lawyers? Selling the house? Have you lost your mind?" He tried to grab my arm, but I stepped back smoothly, just out of his reach. "Hello, Mark." Amelia, I said, my voice cool and level. Let's sit down. There's no need to make a scene. I gestured to a quiet seating area in a corner of the lobby, away from the other guests. They followed me reluctantly, like petulant children being led to the principal's office. We sat, the three of us, in ornate, high-backed chairs. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick with accusation. Mark broke it first. You owe us an explanation, he said, leaning forward, his voice low and intense. We have been worried sick. You disappear, you hire some shark of a lawyer, you start selling off everything Dad worked his entire life for. Let me stop you right there, Mark, I interrupted. My voice was quiet, but cut through his anger like a shard of glass. Let's be very clear about something. Your father was a wonderful salesman, and a decent builder. But he did not build the wealth you seem to believe is your birthright. I did. Mark stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. Amelia just blinked, as if I'd suddenly started speaking in a foreign language. What are you talking about? Mark finally managed to say. Dad built his company from the ground up. He built a company, yes, I agreed. A company that provided us with a comfortable life and a steady income. But the house? The investments? The money that paid for your university education, your wedding, the down payment on your home. That was all me. That came from my investments, managed by my holding company, in my name. Your father had a salary, which he spent. I had a portfolio, which I grew. I let the words hang in the air between us. I watched their faces as they processed the information. Mark's expression shifted from anger to disbelief, then to a dawning, horrified comprehension. Amelia's face was a blank slate of confusion. This was not in her life plan. The house, I continued, pressing my advantage. You called it our house. It was never your house, Mark. It was never even your father's house. I bought that land with money from my mother's inheritance. The deed has been in my maiden name for 45 years. Your father's will, which you were so eager to execute, has no legal claim on it whatsoever. But Dad always said, Mark stammered. Your father said many things, I said calmly. He liked the story of the self-made man. I allowed him to tell it. It was a fiction I was content to live with, for the sake of peace. I see now that was a mistake. It allowed you to grow up with a profound and dangerous sense of entitlement. Amelia found her voice then. It was sharp, accusatory. So you've been lying? To all of us? For all these years? I haven't been lying, I replied, turning my cold gaze on her. I have been private. There is a difference. I never felt the need to announce my financial contributions, just as I never announced that I was the one doing the laundry or paying the bills. I simply did what needed to be done. The fact that you and Mark assumed I was a helpless, financially illiterate dependent is a reflection on you, not on me. I leaned back in my chair. I had laid out the facts. Now came the emotional truth. Let me ask you a question, Mark, I said, my voice softening slightly, but losing none of its steel. When you drove me out to those woods, when you told me you were putting me in a home and taking over my life, did you do it because you loved me? Or did you do it because you saw me as a problem to be managed and an asset to be liquidated? He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his hands, his face flushed with shame. And you, Amelia, I said, turning to my daughter-in-law. When you sent me that text message saying you loved me, what did you mean? Did you love me, Helen, the person? Or did you love what I could provide for you? The free babysitting, the financial safety net, the house you wanted for your children. She flinched as if I had struck her. This has been a very illuminating week, I concluded, my voice returning to its cool, businesslike tone. You have both shown me exactly who you are. And I have decided to believe you. You told me you were worried about me being a burden. So, I have taken steps to ensure I will never be a burden to you, or anyone else, ever again. The house is sold. The assets are secure. And my new will, which I signed this morning, leaves my entire estate to a foundation that helps women who have been cast aside by their families. Mark looked up, his eyes wide with panic. You can't do that, he whispered. The grandchildren will be fine, I said. They have 2 parents who, I'm sure, will learn the value of hard work and self-reliance. It will be an excellent life lesson for them. One you never had. I stood up. The conversation was over. You wanted an explanation, and I have given you one, I said, looking down at them. They seemed to have shrunk into their chairs, 2 small, defeated people. This is goodbye to the old way of doing things. It's time for a new chapter. For all of us, I used his own words, the ones he had spoken to me in the car, and I watched them land with the force of a physical blow. Then I turned and walked away, not looking back. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel anger. I felt only a vast, quiet, and profound peace. The ghost had finally left the building. The days following that final confrontation in the hotel lobby were the quietest of my life. I had expected something more: frantic calls, tearful letters, perhaps even an ambush at the hotel. But there was nothing. Only silence. It was the silence of absolute defeat. They knew they had no leverage, no legal standing, no emotional currency left to spend. I had taken it all back. The house sale closed without a hitch. I signed the final papers in Arthur's office, a simple, anticlimactic act that transferred 47 years of my life into a single, staggering number in a bank account. I didn't even go back to the house one last time. Susan, the realtor, had arranged for a moving company to pack my personal belongings, my books, my clothes, a few cherished pieces of furniture and art, and put them in storage. The rest was to be sold at an estate sale. Mark and Amelia could pick through it if they wanted, like vultures on a battlefield. I didn't care. Those things were just things. My real life was not contained in them. I stayed at the hotel for another week, methodically and calmly building my new life. With Arthur's help, I set up the legal framework for the Helen Miller Foundation. We appointed a board of directors, established the grant criteria, and allocated the initial funding. Pouring my energy into this new purpose felt right. It was a way to transmute the pain of my family's betrayal into something positive, something that would empower other women to find their own strength, to build their own fortresses. My biggest decision was where to go. I could stay in the city, but it felt haunted by the ghosts of my old life. I thought about all the places David and I had talked about retiring to. He had always favored Florida, for the golf. I had always dreamed of the coast of Maine. The rocky shores, the smell of salt and pine, the quiet, hardy independence of the people. It was a dream I had deferred for decades. There was no reason to defer it any longer. I went online and found a small cottage for sale in a town called Camden. It was perched on a hill overlooking the harbor. It had a stone fireplace, a wide porch for watching the boats, and a small garden. It was perfect. I bought it, sight unseen, with a single phone call. A week later, I was on a plane, flying towards my new home. As the plane took off, I looked down at the city sprawling below, the place where I had lived and loved and raised a son and buried a husband. I felt no sadness. Only a sense of release. I was leaving behind the woman I had been, the woman who had lived her life for others, who had mistaken sacrifice for love. The woman landing in Maine would be someone new. The first few months were a quiet joy. My belongings arrived from storage, and I took my time unpacking, arranging my books on the shelves, hanging my favorite paintings on the walls. I found a rhythm to my days that was entirely my own. I woke when I wanted, drank my coffee on the porch watching the lobster boats head out, took long walks along the shore with a stray dog I'd adopted from the local shelter. I named him David, which felt like a small, private joke just for me. He was loyal, quiet, and asked for nothing but a warm place to sleep. A significant improvement on his namesake. I made friends. The woman who ran the local bookstore, a retired professor who lived down the road, the fisherman who sold me fresh haddock from his boat. They knew me only as Helen, the quiet woman from out of state who had moved into the old Miller cottage. They didn't know my story. They didn't see a grieving widow or a cast-off mother. They just saw me. I thought about Mark and Amelia sometimes, but with a strange detachment, as if they were characters in a book I had read long ago. I assumed they were struggling. The sale of their own house would not have covered their debts, not without the massive infusion of capital they had been expecting from me. They would have had to downsize, to cut back, to learn to live within their means. Perhaps it would be good for them. Perhaps it would build character. Or perhaps they would just be bitter forever. It was no longer my concern. My life had become my own. The silence I had once found so deafening after my husband's death was now a welcome friend. It was the silence of peace, of self-possession, of a life lived on one's own terms. One evening, I was sitting on my porch, watching the sun set over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My dog, David, was asleep at my feet. I had a glass of wine in my hand and a good book in my lap. I felt a profound sense of contentment, a feeling so deep and pure it almost brought tears to my eyes. I was not just surviving, I was thriving. I had been underestimated, betrayed, and discarded. I had been driven to the woods and told my life was over. But they were wrong. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. I have learned so much in this past year. I learned that grief is not just an emotion, it's a crucible. It burns away everything that is not essential, leaving you with the raw, unvarnished truth of your life. It shows you who people really are, not who you wanted them to be. For 47 years, I thought my primary role was to be a wife and a mother. I poured myself into those roles like water into a vessel, taking on the shape of whatever my husband and son needed me to be. I thought that was love. I was wrong. Love is not self-erasure. True love, the kind that lasts, is built on a foundation of mutual respect. It sees the other person as a whole, complete individual, not as a resource to be used or a problem to be managed. The love I had for my son was pure, but the love he had for me was a pale imitation. It was a love of convenience, a love of expectation. When I ceased to be convenient, the love vanished. And that is perhaps the most painful and liberating lesson of all: you cannot make someone value you. You can only value yourself. For decades, I hid my own strengths. I downplayed my intelligence, my financial acumen, my role as the true architect of our family's prosperity. I did it for peace, to protect a man's ego, to maintain a traditional family structure that I thought was important. But my silence did not create peace. It created a dangerous fiction, a sense of entitlement in my son that grew like a cancer, eventually consuming our relationship entirely. If I had been open about my contributions from the beginning, if I had insisted on being seen as a true partner, would things have been different? Perhaps. Mark might have grown up with a healthier respect for me, for women, for the nature of work and wealth. Or perhaps he was always going to be the man he became, greedy and weak. I will never know. And I have learned to be at peace with that. Dwelling on the what-ifs is a prison of our own making. The only path forward is to accept the reality of what is and to build a future from there. My future is here, in this small town by the sea. It is a quiet life, but it is deeply, profoundly mine. The Helen Miller Foundation has already awarded its first round of grants. I read the stories of the women we are helping. A 60-year-old woman starting a catering business, after being downsized from her corporate job, a 55-year-old widow going to nursing school, a 70-year-old artist finally opening her own gallery. Their stories are my stories. They are stories of resilience, of quiet strength, of refusing to be rendered invisible. They remind me that I am not alone. To anyone out there who feels unseen, unheard, or underestimated, especially by those who are supposed to love you the most, please hear me. Your worth is not determined by their perception of you. Your strength is not diminished because they fail to see it. You are the author of your own life story, and you hold the pen. You can start a new chapter whenever you choose. It is never too late to reclaim your narrative, to demand respect, to build a life that is authentically and unapologetically your own. It will be terrifying. It will be painful. But the peace and freedom you will find on the other side are worth every single step of the journey. I look out at the harbor now, at the lights twinkling on the water. My son drove me to the woods and told me it was goodbye. He was right. It was. It was goodbye to the woman I used to be. It was goodbye to a life of quiet sacrifice and thankless service. It was goodbye to the illusion of a family I thought I had. And it was the beginning of the most beautiful, honest, and joyful chapter of my life. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to reclaim your own life? I would genuinely love to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of starting over, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of strength and vindication. Thank you for listening.